There's this common phrase which says that we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. The idea of it is nice, but if you're stepping beyond your comfort zone by the very nature, it's going to be uncomfortable, right? It doesn't matter how many times you do that, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And so I don't think we can get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm learning to create space for the leaders that I work with to learn to, instead of react, to just slow down a little bit and create space for the new that might be emerging. Start to recognize the discomfort as like a leading indicator that not that we're going in the wrong direction, but that if I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable, I'm probably moving in the right direction.
My guest today is an Olympic and leadership coach, a best-selling author, international keynote speaker, corporate advisor on high performance, and a facilitator of possibility. His hobbies include beekeeping, surfing, freediving, and whale encounters. He's a husband to Ash and father to Josh, a published music producer and a great neighbour. Welcome, Chipp Richards.
Thanks, Pete. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to hear. And you didn't have to come far to be here.
It was a short commute. Yeah, I was running a little bit late, and so I was 30 seconds late.
And you can't blame the traffic.
No, that's right. Except for the bee traffic, there is some of that.
There was.
Yeah.
And when I say you're a great neighbour, we're actually physical neighbours. We live across the road from each other.
Yeah.
How awesome.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, it's been awesome to meet you, and I've known you for a while now, and something about you that's really quite charismatic and magnetic. And I feel this, this friendship building between us, and you're already introducing me to things that are blowing my mind. And every time we have a conversation and encounter, I'm left a bit mind blown. So hopefully we'll have our minds blown today.
I feel the same about you. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So I just thought we could possibly start off. I know a lot of people do know you, but some of my audience might not. And so, and I'm going to get some of this wrong because I don't know your full history, but I do know that you were training as part of the Olympic ski team and that you were an elite athlete and that you had some injuries, and I believe you blew out one knee and then possibly the other one as well, and that at some point it became clear that your career as an elite athlete was possibly over, and then that somehow transitioned into you becoming the coach or a coach of the Olympic ski team and possibly America, or I'll let you go into that, or Australian ski team. And so the transition from athlete to coach, but also I'd like to hear a little bit about how you overcome adversity. So if you could maybe start there, or
yeah, it's a big open question. Great. Well, yeah. So I grew up in the mountains of Colorado, and youngest of three brothers, and lots of adventure in our life. But probably the arena that I learned the most about myself and human possibility was in the realms of freestyle skiing. So I was a competitive freestyle skier, and I think at like age 12, when they first made the announcement that the sport of freestyle was going to be in the Olympics, I just kind of I can remember storming into my kitchen, during dessert time and saying, "I'm going to the Olympics," and everybody's kind of looking at me going, "Yeah, okay, good luck with that." But it was really a deep calling. I just absolutely loved the sport, and this sort of combination of this kind of daily stretching beyond your limits and the fun involved in that was super powerful for me growing up. And so I was well and truly on that path. And I guess by the time I was sort of 19, and 20, I was sort of ranked number one in the US for the sport, and as a combined skier at the time, but with a real passion for moguls. And as you said, I had basically 2 seasons in a row. The first season, I just about a week before the big World Cup qualifying event that year, I landed a jump. It wasn't like a dramatic fall or anything cool about it. I just landed just like I'd landed, 10,000 other jumps. But on this particular occasion, I felt really strong pain go up through the left-hand side of my body and sort of explode my left knee. And so I went through the whole process of, surgery and, reconstruction and learning how to walk and move and ski again, and came back the following year and somehow regained my ranking. And then similar time the following year, slightly different situation, but the last jump of a big event, I just took kind of one step further up the in run to go a little bit higher and a little bit faster, and I kind of out jumped the landing hill and basically exploded my right knee. And so I did the same process of reconstructive surgery and kind of recovery, and just went after it. I just thought, oh, this is just another obstacle in the road. And, I was very determined. And my surgeon actually stopped me, I guess, in our last appointment together when he was checking to make sure I was strong again. He said, look, you're strong. You're stronger than you were when I met you, actually. But so you have my blessing, and you need to know that the nature of the way you're going at this sport, you're going to be back to see me again if you keep going at this pace. And I can't guarantee that it will be at a time or way of your choosing. And I think the first two had been such a radical disruption and massive just crisis for me on a few levels, that his words were just enough to have me pause for a moment. And in that pause, my coach at the time said, why don't you coach with me for a season, and then you can come back next year and compete. You just stay close to the fire without getting burned. We can train really hard, but you don't need to perform. You can just train, and then you come back to competing next year. And so that's how I started my coaching, really with the intention of having it be one step, the next step to my Olympic dream. And, but literally about 3 hours into our first day, I started to feel a shift happen inside of me, where I really felt all the pain and the angst of kind of losing my dream in a way started to fall away. And I started to feel this real feeling of kind of coming home. Like I just felt, wow, I'd worked really hard to be an athlete, but there was something about the coaching that just felt really natural. So yeah, I just lightly leaned into it, and every kind of step I took in that direction, just the path seemed to open. And yeah, within a couple of years, I was down here in Australia, coaching the Australian Olympic program. So,
wow.
Yeah, which I thought was going to be a 6-month adventure, just to come down and, work with the Aussies for a few months. And it's now 29 years later, I'm still here. And so it's, I can look back at that time and see the poetry in a way of those injuries and how they kind of shifted. They created such a strong shift in my path. And I think that's the strength of the disruption was required for me to actually change my path, but it opened up something way, way greater for me. So,
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. And so my question was a little bit around adversity, and, you could look at it as an adversity, but really it could be a blessing in disguise. And it sounds like it is, and that you thought you were heading on one path, and then life had a different plan for you. But life's plan seems to be every bit as amazing as the other plan. And so did you, just a quick question around, did you take the Australian ski team to the Olympics as a coach? Oh, you did?
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I did. So kind of about one Olympic cycle after the Olympics that I had kind of targeted as an athlete. And it was really beautiful to kind of have that dream fulfilled, but in a way that was different than I ever would have imagined, and with it, by then I was married to my wife, Ash, and, had started a whole life, out of the ashes of what had been an injury. So it's interesting that, when you come back to the question around adversity, it's interesting how often I can probably see patterns of, the determination that I had as an athlete, I see show up in other areas of my life. And sometimes I'll push or I'll drive with so much commitment towards something, and that I might drive past some of the early whispers of my intuition to take a different path, or to open my perspective to a different way. but then ultimately often my body or something will create a strong enough interruption that seems like adversity. But in my experience, adversity, it's almost always like a redirecting or if it is direct adversity, it's like a pushing back to cause me to build more resolve. And that resolve is what's needed on the path ahead. So the adversity isn't appreciated in the moment. But then when I'm moving 10 steps down the road, I go, oh, wow, I needed that because it actually built up this fitness to be able to go the distance. So.
Yeah, every crisis is really an opportunity in disguise. And I don't think sometimes we're smart enough to know in the moment whether things that are happening to us are bad for us or good for us. And only, looking back, retrograde, can you see whether it was, served you or not? And it sounds like you're really happy with the path and plan that life has had for you.
So much. But I think to your point, and I'm sure you see this a ton in your work, and in my work as a coach, when I see an athlete or a leader hitting a space of real deep challenge, for me, I smile. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Great things are emerging here, and for them, it might feel like a total crisis. So it's easier to see from a one degree removed, as a coach or an advisor. I'm sure you see this all the time in your work that, wow, as someone's hitting a deep place within themselves that's making them go, wow, I need to run the other way. You're going actually just one more step forward and you're in the heart of the matter.
Well, you're really speaking to an aspect of my coaching that I've kind of known, but I like the way you articulated it, is that's true. Like when I'm coaching clients, and we have different ways of coaching. But I'm sure there's also some similarities and overlap. But that is one thing that when I'm seeing the client in front of me really stretched and at the edge, about to have their breakthrough, like that really juices me up for some reason.
Yeah,
it's a part of who I am.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. And I would imagine that one of the things I love, and this is maybe leaping forward, but in the current work that I do, because it's in different arenas. With different industries and different areas and different cultures and different people, different walks of life, but there's sort of some common human threads. And so you can start to see that whatever the external story that's playing out, no matter what it is, I'm building a business or I'm, whatever, expanding my team or going for a new social enterprise, whatever is happening on the outside, in a way, it's almost just what's needed as a catalyst to create the growth that's needed on the inside. And that's the real thing, that's the thing that lasts in the end anyway, is the growth of the human. So
it's like it sounds like you're passionate about human growth potential, and that you're seeing that there are some common threads that are the architecture of that human growth potential that can be applied regardless of the setting or the culture or the mission. Is that?
Yeah. And I would say so much so that, and for me, what I find myself less and less interested in what's happening on the outside, whether they made their budget or whether they grew, and more, what's the through line of growth that's happening? Because if the humans are growing, then it's inevitable that whatever they're doing is going to expand in proportion. And maybe the thing that they think they're doing, which is so important, is actually just the whole purpose of the thing is to grow them. I think we don't often, we think it's all about the thing we're trying to achieve, but maybe it's the thing is working us.
Yeah. I one of the things I like about being a coach is who I have to become in order to be the person that someone's going to come and seek coaching from. And so I do like that aspect because it pushes me at my growth edge. So from your observations in working with teams of people, corporations, individuals, you're fascinated about this growth and transformation that's happening within the individuals or the team. What are one or two observations that you think are unique to you that you've observed, if you can articulate one or two things that you see a commonality in your work? If you can understand the question.
Say the question again.
Yeah, so you're fascinated by what's happening inside the human being as they're growing and who they're becoming, and that you've noticed that there are some commonalities in terms of, regardless of the team, the mission, the culture, and you've probably identified or distilled down a few unique observations that may be unique to Chipp Richards and no one else has seen before, or maybe not. But so what are a couple of observations that you've picked up on that's happening in people when they're growing? Like what is happening?
Yeah, that's great. It's a big question. Well, one thing that's showing up a lot, I would say, in the current field of play that I find myself in is there's this common phrase which says that we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, or something, as leaders, that, you know, that we're if you're trying to do something new, if you're committed to going beyond what you or we did previously, that you're going to have to hit the edge of what's comfortable to you, and then you go out into that space that's unknown, and that, you know, this notion that we have to get comfortable with that. And I love the idea of it, but what I've realized is that the idea of it is nice, but if you're stepping beyond your comfort zone, by the very nature, it's going to be uncomfortable, right? It doesn't matter how many times you do that, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And so I don't think we can get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it always feels uncomfortable, right? that's what it is.
By definition.
But what I'm noticing in a lot of the people that I work with, and I would say I also see it in myself, is when I hit that edge of the known for me, that might bring up, kind of survival instincts, like, ooh, there's something wrong here. I'm learning, and I'm learning to create space for the leaders that I work with to learn to, instead of react, to just slow down a little bit and create space for the new that might be emerging, and sort of, in a way, to start to recognize the discomfort as like a leading indicator that, not that we're going in the wrong direction, but that if I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable, I'm probably moving in the right direction. And it might not ever feel comfortable, but if I can recognize that I'm moving into fresh territory, and if my sort of inner compass is lined up well, then I can trust that discomfort a little and just take a step and take a breath and get used to it, maybe, or tolerate it. Take another deep breath and then take another step. And so there's something around that which is current. I'm noticing a lot. I think because a lot of the different industries and systems that we're operating in, or have been operating in for quite a long time, are experiencing different levels of breaking down. And so there is a lot of the tried and true ways that we've been doing business for a long time just aren't resonating for people. And so they're hitting the edge of the known field, and they're having to step out. And so for me, I think it's where we belong right now. We need to be out there. And if we're not feeling a little bit edgy, then we're probably just kind of repeating what we've always done. And so as a coach, being able to spot that moment and create enough intrinsic kind of space so the person feels like, I can sit in this unknown space for a moment and be present to what's emerging, as opposed to making up stories about it in my mind.
Wow, so much came out of that. That's amazing. Beautifully articulated. I'm glad I asked that exact question, because what I'm, thinking from an audience point of view, listening to that, is that, because I'm sure some of our audience are feeling discomfort. And I think on some level we all get to experience discomfort, and particularly in these, modern times. When I say, modern times, last 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot going on in terms of systems breaking down, like you said. And, in my coaching practice, everyone I talk to is like, struggling, and, mental health problems and real conflict going on. And so I guess what I heard in that's positive for the audience is that if you're experiencing discomfort, it's not that something's wrong. It's the edge, and that just beyond that discomfort, if you can sit with it long enough and relax into it, that something's being birthed, or something more beautiful is emerging on the other side of it. And so, I get the conversation you started with, how in the industry that growth only happens outside your comfort zone. And so another quick question on that topic is it possible to grow while you're comfortable? or because I don't want to make it be that I have to be uncomfortable to have something positive transformation. Is it possible that I could have a positive transformation while being comfortable?
Yeah, I love that question. And I would say I would say that the way to think about it, or maybe the way I think about it now that I'm looking at it, is kind of as a spectrum, right? And it's easy to think it's black or white. I'm either comfortable or I'm not comfortable, right? But that actually there's a million stops along the way. And like radical discomfort for me was having my knees explode in order to create the shift and the new story that wanted to emerge through me. That was radical discomfort. And I would say the reason it was that radical was because I ignored the quiet whispers that would have been a lot more comfortable had I listened a bit earlier and gone, you know what, I'm feeling like maybe I need to take the day off today. Instead of having all the pressure of my sponsors and my coaches and my family saying, you better go, go, go. I mean, they never said that, but the feeling of that, overriding any intuitive impulse to take a breather, maybe I wouldn't have exploded those knees, right? Or if I would have kind of just tuned in and thought, wow, interesting. I notice how much I'm loving being the captain of this team and my kind of natural coaching role that's emerging as I'm an athlete. Maybe I'll just lean a little bit more into that. What I noticed for myself is looking for the early signals of the edge now and kind of recognizing that change or transformation can happen in a really gentle way. And it doesn't need to be like this radical break from what we've always done or like a huge departure. Sometimes maybe that's required. For me, I was stubborn, so it was needed. Like I needed the mallet on the knees to like break that direction or just change it. But I do believe we can move in a much more harmonious way through transformation. And my sense is there'll always be elements of, ooh, that's a bit new, and whoa, that's a bit like I've never been here before, so that feels a bit uncomfortable, but it doesn't need to be painful. I think it can be magical, actually.
And so one of the things you spoke to then is that, and if I got this right, is there is this thing like if you really want a goal, you've got to push hard for it and become like hyper-focused. And because I've got this goal and this target I want to hit. But if I'm overly hyper-focused and too stubborn and too driven, that I might be missing some subtler, nuanced things that, like you call them, whispers. And so I'm hearing because, some people like super push themselves, and then you can push yourself too far, and that may be possibly what happened for you, is that you weren't listening to, like you say, take the day off. You don't need to push this hard. And in not listening to that and pushing harder, you have this adverse event.
Yeah.
Because I've got that collapsed with, no, I need to be hyper-focused and pushing. And if I'm not pushing and hyper-focused, I'm not doing it the right way.
Yeah.
And now I'm hearing that, no, you can do two things simultaneously. You can be hyper-focused and committed and disciplined in your work, but also allow some time and some space to check in and listen for the whispers.
Yeah, I think you've said it beautifully. Interestingly, and I know this is something we wanted to talk about, so I might just bring it in now. I was recently in the Kingdom of Tonga, where I once a year bring a group of leaders to go and swim with humpback whales for a week. And it's, in and of itself, just being in the Kingdom of Tonga and out there in sort of 1,000-meter deep water, these tiny little islands and a tiny little boat, looking to have encounters with whales, that alone is massive. But inside of the context of leadership and sort of purpose, it becomes a really incredible context and backdrop to be exploring ourselves and how we work and how we move together. And there was a lesson this year that really hit really strong for the group, which kind of demonstrates exactly what you were talking about. And so it takes immense commitment to go there, right? Like it takes a couple of days to get there, and you got to kind of, leave what you're doing, and you got to be willing to go and have this adventure. And so And a lot of people people that went this year, people that go normally, you know, they're leading their companies, they're leading teams, they're sort of, I don't really know what it means by saying type A, but like, you know, just like they are people that are driven and achieve things in that kind of external way. And that's an element that's needed to kind of get them out there and into the water. But if that energy is all they bring, and they jump in the water and swim out to go see the whales, whales are huge, as you know, and massively powerful, as you know, but they're also super sensitive. And so they can feel the energy of a group of 3 or 4 swimmers that are moving at pace towards them, even, you know, from 200 or 300 meters away, and the whale will just take a deep breath and go under and disappear. And it's a really interesting process for high achieving individuals to be confronted with, oh, I can't just make this happen. And it doesn't matter how fast I swim. There's no way I can keep up with the whales if the whale doesn't want to connect. And so over the 8-day period, these kind of layers of ambition start to shave off. And 2 things happen, you know, so there's no less commitment, but the way people start to show up starts to just, like, the edges start to round out and soften. And the first thing they realize is that, well, we're much better if we stay together. And so rather than having the high achievers swim out as fast as they can, and the guys that haven't swum in 25 years are just back at the boat choking on their mask and snorkel, they slow down and they realize the whales aren't gonna want to connect with us if we're all scattered, if we're moving at different paces. It just kind of stresses them out. And so we're better to stay together and move slow and meet the whales where they are. And it's amazing what happens is as they combine their commitment to being there with a more in tune sense of connection with each other, acceptance, like surrender to however things unfold, less ambition, less pushing. Over the 8 days, it goes from them trying to go and see the whale to the whales coming to the group. And it's one of the most powerful things to witness and to be part of, but for people to recognize that, oh, wow, actually, if I just really slow down and center myself, this thing which I otherwise would think I needed to chase will actually come to me. And so it's a little like I don't know how we hold that day to day in that way, but that was my biggest takeaway this year from Tonga. I was like, wow, we have to find this beautiful way of weaving the power of commitment with total surrender. And then the whales come to us.
I love it. One thing I've noticed about you is that you are an astute observer of nature. And I noticed how because you are an observer, and maybe this openness to you is that you're able to glean lessons from nature and incorporate them into your understanding of your, human potential and your coaching. So I'm also, we share that passion. I've swum with humpbacks and are mind blowing. And I believe their hearts are, I don't know, like the size of a television set or something like that.
So
they have this electromagnetic field, and I got up very close enough to eyeball one.
Yeah.
And I felt the electromagnetic force of its heart impact my heart. And I haven't been the same since. And one of my favourite things to do is go sailing with the humpbacks. So there was something else. There's something else I wanted to say about that too, in terms of that hyper-competitive, driven type personality. And from psychology, there's this thing called social styles, and there's 4 social styles. And the way they categorize your social style is they look at one axis is how competitive you are versus how cooperative you are. And you can measure that through doing psychometrics. I'm hyper-competitive, or I'm hyper-cooperative, or somewhere in between. And then they also look at emotive, how emotive you are. But in terms of that competition versus cooperation, that's the conversation I was hearing, in that if I go chase these whales and I want to be the first one to get there, I'm hyper-competitive, but I might be pushing away what I really want. And then you anticipated that if you did it together as a group, and that's more a cooperative approach. And so I think both of those approaches are equally powerful, like complete hyper-competitiveness or incredible amount of cooperation. And that's one of the balances that seems to be showing up in the world today in global events, is this like divisiveness, which is hyper-competitive and tribalism, versus cooperation and unity. And I think we can achieve lots by finding a balance between those two forces, cooperation and competition.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's almost like, as I'm listening to you talk about it, they're sort of different sides of the same spectrum. And there's moments when each are needed.
Yeah.
Right? There's moments when, as individuals, we need to stand for something so immovably and so deeply that it doesn't matter what's in our way. It doesn't matter what other people are saying. There's no time to wait for other people to get it. We have to take steps in that. We have to move. And there's moments when that's the real power. Like, that's our greatest power. And then there's moments when it's the opposite, where it doesn't matter how much we want it as an individual. If I'm not connecting with you, we're never going to achieve what we came here to do. And I think that finding the rhythm and finding when to be where is probably the dance.
Yeah, and I was an emergency nurse, and I worked in emergency rooms, and I want to speak to this like gap. So if we're hyper-focused and hyper-competitive and we don't leave this little gap for observation of the nuanced stuff, we might miss something. And I was working a busy night shift in an emergency department, and I was part of a trauma team. And a trauma team, like, there's several doctors, emergency doctors. There's the trauma surgeon who's leading the whole team. There's a team of nurses. There's the radiographer. There's the pharmacologist. There's a respiratory person. And so this is for a multi-trauma person coming into the emergency room. There's a whole team. And I was standing there one night, and one of these cases came in, probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and the trauma surgeon was there, and he's the highest paid guy in that room. And I watched him, and I observed him for the whole thing, and he did nothing. So he was the highest paid guy and did the least observable work. Everyone else is rushing around, putting tubes in and IVs and taking vital signs and putting intercostal catheters into the lungs, and it's a team of people working. And he's just sitting back. And afterwards, I went up to him. I said, "Look, I just observed something, and I just want to pick your brain. Like, what can you tell me about your approach to what just happened?" And he said, "Well, look, I've learned something over my career." He said, "In case of emergency, immediately do nothing," which sounds kind of counterintuitive. I says, "Oh, what do you mean by that?" And he says, "Well, somebody's just got to sit back and watch, because if you rush in and get super busy, you're going to miss something. And it's that thing that you miss that's really important." So he says, "My job is to let everybody else do the doing. And they've all got those skills, and they're highly trained in what they're doing. But my role is to sit back and observe for the one thing that they might miss, and then just pick them up on that thing." And so I use that analogy in my coaching practice when people come in and they're like in this crisis, and they're like, "What do I do? What do I do?" And I just remind them, like, in moments of crisis, immediately do nothing. Just create a gap, listen to those whispers, and, maybe this crisis is your opportunity.
Beautiful. I love that. It reminds me of a Nigerian proverb that I heard, which I really like, and I share with a lot of the leaders that I work with. It says, "Times are urgent. Let us slow down."
Yes,
right.
Similar.
And it's interesting. It's interesting our compelling compulsion to do, and to think that that the solution is in the doing, and there are aspects of doing which are so required, right? But I love his perspective and his willingness to kind of restrain and kind of keep that sort of balcony view of everything that was going on. Beautiful.
It's more in the being often, and I've learned this as I've matured and gotten older, because when you're younger, it's all about the doing, do. And then as I've matured, I'm like, no, a lot of it's got to do with how I'm being. And just that's what I observed with this trauma surgeon. It was how he was being. He was just calm. And it was in his calm being that he didn't have to do anything to have the most value in the room. It was just in his being.
It's really powerful, I think, to distinguish the power of being, and then also to recognize that even in the power of being, I'm sure he could be there in the room with everybody just being, but he could also be a presence which is causing stress and strain by the way he's showing up and being, I'm just thinking about some of the leaders that I work with in places where they talk a lot about the importance of leaders being present and being visible. And this is really true, being out there with their teams and connected with their teams. And this is super true. And they can be out there connected with their teams and causing tons of stress with their presence of being. So one of the traits, coming back to your original question, that I notice the most important among all the leaders that I work with is a recognition and a sense of personal responsibility about their own state of being, and recognizing that how they show up, not just what they do and not just what they say, but actually how the state of being that they're in when they are present with people has a massive impact on everything that they're aiming to achieve with the teams that they're working with. And so doing whatever that they need to do to get themselves into a good state of being is like number one priority, number one responsibility. That one, their presence is important. So that surgeon's presence was super key, but him being lined up and conscious of how he was being in that room and doing whatever he needed to so that he could show up in that room and be that sort of force of calm. That's the practice right there, right?
Yeah, and so it's a focus, it's a shift from doing to being, and how he was being was, and I take your point, he was being present. Like his presence was palpable. There's nothing more powerful, I think, in the masculine than presence. I think for the feminine, it's more radiance, but for like a man in his element, he's hyper present, and then he was being calm, and I'd say he was being focused. So his ways of being, he was present, calm, and focused. But I didn't see him do anything.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so you're noticing this, and this is some of the coaching that you give to the leaders of teams, is that it's not necessarily about what you're doing, but how you're being. And so you're observing for how they're being with their team. And this comes from ontology. Ontology is the study of being. Ontos means being. So there's a whole study of being, and we are human beings. So, and I'm learning from this conversation as I'm saying it, because I lead a small team at the moment in my company, and I'm already aware, although not maybe as aware as I could be, as to how I'm being is going to really have the most impact than what I'm doing. And I know I do need to do some things with my team, but I'm going to be more hyper focused on how I'm being with my team, because this conversation is moving me in that direction more.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's super key. And I think it's really easy to underestimate how the way we show up, how it impacts people. And my number, if I am meeting with a manager, that word, it's always really annoys me, but like there's this sort of notion that as a manager, I'm managing people. And the first real distinction I will almost always make with the leaders that I work with who are trying to be better managers is, well, okay, great. What are you doing to manage yourself? How do you manage your own self and your own state of being so that when you're working with your people, they're getting the best of you. They're not getting stressed out, stretched, fragmented you, just leaking your stress on them. They're getting you at your best. And so it's kind of creating space for them to bring their best.
I love that, because I've had it collapsed that a manager, what he's doing is managing teams and managing people. And you're taking it half a step back and saying, well, sure, you are doing that, but are you managing yourself as you're managing them? And then, so that you shift their focus onto that. And then the questions for me would be, well, how are you being while you're managing these people?
Boom. Love it.
Awesome.
I love it.
So we'll come back to leadership, but there was one other question I had around, I guess, performance, and it's just because I'm curious about it and I don't know the answer. So what's the distinction or difference between training and performing? And is there a distinction? And when you're about to perform, do you need to let go of your training in order to step into the performing?
It's great. It's a great question. Probably depends on the field of play, right? So, you know, in the sport that I was in, there was a very distinct difference between, you know, the work that you did as to train over days or weeks or months, and then the very specific 30 seconds that you had to perform, and kind of try to focus all of that training into one clear, focused expression of it. But how we manage that transition is an interesting one, and there's different philosophies, right? I think when I was growing up, and you know, like if you talk to some like long distance runners, for example, or ultra marathoners, the way they train is, you know, there's no way. I don't know that world that well, but in talking to those that I do know, if I'm going to do a 100-mile race, I'm not going to do a whole bunch of 100-mile runs to train for it. You know, that will destroy my body in the process of getting ready. So they have this way of kind of preparing their body to then on the day go beyond what they've ever gone to before, you know, right? So they're kind of like prime their body to then go into the unknown levels of exertion. That's interesting, you know? And I think if I think back to when I was an athlete, I think I kind of did that. I think I always had this expectation that I'm going to train, and then on the performance day, I'm going to like perform out of my skin. I'm going to go beyond. I don't think that was the best strategy at the time, because I think what that did was it like put extra pressure in the sport that I did. As an endurance athlete, probably the right way to keep your nervous system and molecular structure in place is don't overdo it. But I think as a kind of a, you know, competitor in the sport that I was in, training underneath the level that I wanted to perform at was putting a lot of pressure on how do I fill that gap on game day. And I've since worked with a lot of coaches in that space, and some will say they train their athletes to like 110% or 120%, and then they ask them to compete at 80. Oh. And that their role as a coach is to get so that their athlete's 80% is better than everyone else's 100%. And so that's that's a kind of an extreme approach, right? So those are kind of that's two ends of the spectrum. One would say, you know, don't overtrain and, you know, and then create space to step into on the day. Others would say train the shit out of it and then back it off on game day. Really interesting. I guess if I think about it currently for myself in the areas where I need to perform, let's say it's a talk or a workshop or something like that, I think for me, the difference between the preparation and the execution is, well, it's found in the space of being, right? So I find what I do is in the preparation phase, there's enough rigor that I think one of the most important keys for me is that when I enter into the execution space, I don't have a lot going on in my mind. I've kind of done enough to put my mind at rest, and then I can bring the preparation, but I can be really present and able to dance with what emerges. And I think that's for me in this stage in my life anyway. That's something I really love to explore is, you know, what do I need to do so that I can enter this field of play and just be really open to what wants to emerge, and especially if it's something I never could have imagined, right?
That's that thing you said, that you are a facilitator of possibility.
Yeah.
And so the training is the practice and the preparation, and it's repetitive, and maybe you're, you know, getting certain neural pathways or neuromuscular pathways trained, and that you need preparation. But then at the performance level, because there's this thing, the zone, that I've been in the zone before.
For sure.
People who perform enter a zone where they're not even thinking about their training or anything. It's like in that you're in the moment and you're present and you're open to possibility, and things just open up. So I guess, yeah, we kind of nailed the distinction between the two, the training and the performance. And the performance is doing all the training and prep, resting the mind. So I know I've done my prep, so I don't have to be worried. And I'm going to go into this space of possibility, knowing that I'm prepared for it. And then allow things to emerge and to play in that space. And in that playing, I played AFL football, not at AFL level. You're American, so you guys play gridiron, but you've probably watched some AFL.
For sure.
Yeah, and one of the concerns I have about the level to which these guys push themselves, so a lot of the hyper elite guys, they've had 24 surgeries by the time they're 28. Like some of them have had half a dozen shoulder recons and knees, and they're just devastating their bodies. And you know, like at what point do you draw the line? And you know, in American football, there's a lot of padding and you know helmets and things, and these guys just go out there bare knuckling.
I know. It's madness.
And do you have a comment on that? Like that, because that you talked about type A, hyper driven, hyper focused people, and there's just going to be people that are temperamentally built that way. And I guess maybe in American football they've gotten smart and thought, well, we also need to protect these beings from overdoing it and harming themselves. And you've had these kind of injuries and surgeries. So for me, it's like, and maybe the marketplace, or if that's the right word, sets its own lines and its own parameters. And maybe it's up for each individual to decide what level of sacrifice on his body is he willing to make to perform at that level that juices him up. I don't even know what my question is in that.
Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting just to hear you riff on that a little bit. And I think, one of the gifts that the sporting realm gives us, and I think it's probably why people watch it and why the system is set up that we pay people, ridiculous amounts and all that, and we glorify it, is I do think that the sporting realm across the board, not just in kind of traditional sports like football or whatever, but, climbing or whatever else, or surfing, they're like really compressed forms of access to a part of ourselves that we know we came here to experience. And I think, some of our modern kind of phraseology around it is the zone or flow, but those feelings can be felt in any encounter. I'm sure you have that in the garden, or when you're, when you're doing whatever it is that you love to do, we can drop into that space. And I think there's that connection to kind of flow. And then there's also the going beyond what was perceived as possible. And those two things, my belief is that, we massively underestimate who we are and what we're capable of. And so one of the gifts of life is to kind of give ourselves the opportunities to experience our wider capacities. And I think sport gives us these like really compressed versions of that. And so when we're watching sport and see someone break a record or go beyond, it like triggers some synapses in our own mind that says, oh, wow, that's possible there. That must be possible here. My hope, right? And I think when you're in that space, it's also highly addictive. And when you're, when you're getting these massive, whatever hits, dopamine or whatever you get from being deep inside a 30-foot wave or whatever it is, it's like exposure to an expanded state of consciousness, right? And so I think it can be very infectious, and it's probably why people continue to go way beyond what their body's capable of, partly because of that, because they're touching a part of human potential, which is very rare and unique, and they feel it in those peak moments. Yeah,
peak experiences or transcendence. Like I've gone beyond the known possibility. I don't know if they've done studies on this, but it'd be interesting because you mentioned maybe dopamine, maybe it's the reward, and maybe it's not. And how would you, like if a elite athlete's in a peak moment, it might only last 2 seconds when they nails that high jump or something, and it's not like you're going to have them connected up to functional MRI scans and taking their blood levels. Like, is it possible for us to even do a scientific study, go, what is it that's happening in the brain that's transcendent, that's causing, it's probably got nothing to do with blood chemistry or, the mechanisms of neural pathways and things. It's probably something beyond that.
Yeah, great.
Maybe we'll never know because that'd be a very difficult.
Yeah.
And then maybe there are some experiments they can do to look at chemistry and neural activity during peak experiences. And, I'm curious, I probably will explore some of those. I'm not prepared for that conversation today. But it is interesting, man. I remember playing football and, I remember the ball was kicked up in the air and there was a player in front of me and he was taller than me and it looked like he was going to mark the ball. And next thing I was standing on his shoulders and I'd gone up way too early and the ball hadn't arrived yet. So I was up there for a few seconds.
Just hanging out.
Yeah, just hanging there. And he didn't buckle. So, and then the ball's drifted out in the wind. I've just kind of taken my right arm out, almost at my maximum reach and just pulled in this one-handed, what they call them a specky, like this mark. And the interesting, because I can still recall that, I didn't land gracefully at all. Like I couldn't even kick the ball. I landed so hard. But there was a moment of that I can still feel as I talk about it. Everything slows down, and it's beyond me. Like I couldn't do that. If I'd trained 100 times to do that at training, I wouldn't have been able to do that. But in that moment, something else became possible that maybe before that was impossible. And so I like that way of looking at it. And so it's maybe that's at the individual micro level.
Yeah.
But at the macro level of life on the planet, life's always pushing for new possibility.
Yeah.
And so it's probably bigger than us.
Yeah, that's it. I love it. And as you said, that reaching out on the shoulders of the giant in front of you and grabbing the ball, clearly that became a reference point, which either consciously or subconsciously is in you now. And I don't know how you draw on that, but I would imagine that moment has informed other moments in your life where something felt out of reach or something was, I don't know, but I can just say from my own experience, there would be like a string of little micro moments like that in my existence that when I've hit the edge of my comfort zone and I'm looking for some reference point, I can go, oh, this feels a little bit like that moment. And that moment opened up in a way that worked out, or that moment opened up in a way that I couldn't have imagined. And so it's like when we have these little peak moments, they give us little pearls to call on when we need to later.
I would call that pearl that I got from that moment, anything is possible. That was what I realised in that moment. And I live my life that way. Even when things look like they're really going to shit, I'm like optimistic, positive and confident that everything's going to be okay because I believe in an infinite universe. Not only is anything possible, but everything's possible. And so yeah, I didn't realise the pearl that I got from that now that, I went there and looked at it. And so that is a part of my nature, is that anything's possible. And it keeps me moving forward towards new possibility. And so you are a facilitator of possibility. I didn't know what you meant by that when I was introducing you as that, but it's starting to become real clear.
I love it. I love it.
So I wanted to just switch a little bit from performance to leadership. And I guess how I crafted this question was, where have all the leaders gone? And that would be making it about individuals, or where has leadership gone? And this is only my own personal opinion. I look around at Australian, and I don't want to get too political, but I'm looking more at that level of national government, bureaucratic, because we vote these people in, we give them power, we put them in a position of leadership, and then we're either happy or disappointed. And I would say, from my own personal perspective, when I look around, I'm pretty much disappointed in the level of leadership that's currently around, and there are a few examples that are exceptions to that rule. And so I guess I'm honing in on really, I guess, the definition of leadership. And the one definition that sticks in my mind is the one I got from Simon Sinek, who talks about leadership. And he said that the leader isn't the man in charge, but the person who's willing to take responsibility for the people under their charge. And so I don't know if everybody's aware of that distinction, and I've been called a leader at different times. I'll share this real briefly because it's a bit out of the blue. So I went to an all-boys Catholic school, and we have a 10-year reunion every 10 years, and a few years back I went back for the 40-year reunion, and I bumped into a guy I hadn't seen since I was 17. I was 57 at the time. And him and another couple of classmates were sitting down having a chat over a beer. And this guy, Steve, he commented, he says, Pete, you know, we always saw you as the spiritual leader in the class. And like, it kind of like came out of blue. I'm like, what? Spiritual leader? What are you talking about? He says, no, we all knew. We talked about it. We didn't talk about it to you at the time. But we were like, there's something about that, Pete, like he's a spiritual leader, which is a funny thing to be told 40 years after the fact. And like, I was completely disobedient. I was the class clown. I was the provocateur, the disruptive one. I was the one always at the front of the class in front of all the kids being belted with a leather strap by the teacher for my disruptive behaviour. But it galvanised something in my classmates. I don't know if that's what they saw as spiritual leadership, but I was certainly someone who was willing to stand up to what I saw as tyranny and like these rules that don't make sense. We've got to sit still for 45 minutes and shut up, and we're just kids who want to just interact and have fun. And so I always push the buttons. And so I'm not saying I'm a spiritual leader. I think you would be arrogant to call yourself that. But if people want to call me that, then I'm just curious about what they were pointing to. And so, and I certainly didn't feel like I was responsible for those, my classmates. I did a little bit because I felt like I was responsible for lightening the mood in the room, because the mood was often quite, you know, strict, and, you know, if you step out of line, you're going to get punished. I'm like, screw that. I'm going to, you know, bring some lightheartedness to the room. And so anyway, that's a bit of a segue. So going back to leadership, I'd like to tease out a definition of leadership, or not even, it doesn't have to be a definition. It can be, doesn't have to be linear. It can be, yeah. So what would you like to say about leadership, and what's your view on current world leaders? You don't have to go to the political part of it if you want, but what may be missing in some leaders that they can't see?
First of all, I do see you as a spiritual leader. And I think the public flogging we could see as a pattern amongst other spiritual leaders.
Don't crucify me, Chipp.
Yeah. It was interesting when you were talking. I didn't know where you were going to go with the question. I'm still not sure exactly where we went with the question, but I loved your listening to you, and what as you were talking about. I think one of the definitions of leadership that you'd heard previously, what I found myself in my mind thinking was, the leader isn't a person. It's not that guy or the person that's below that guy, but is responsible. It's a archetype. It's a part of each of us. I would say that comes alive when we are deeply connected to purpose, when we're really clear about either what's important or why it's important, in a way that it's like overflowing in who we are. So when you think about moments in your life when, you know, right back to the school days, but in current life, where a moment is unfolding and a part of you wakes up that's so clear about what needs to happen next, or what needs to, you know, shift, or, you know, and it might not be like, you might not even know the answer, but you just know something has to shift, and the force in you is so strong that you can't hold it back. I would say that's like the seed of leadership that actually is alive in all of us. And when I see leadership show up in an organization or a team, it's often born in that way. Like someone will be so dissatisfied with something the way it is, or they'll have such a strong inspiration about something, or an idea that moves them so that they suddenly they have no choice but to speak about it passionately or to move in the direction of it and to kind of take responsibility of it or to bring people with them. That's the quality like I look for. And oftentimes in the teams that I work with, there'll be the official leaders and there'll be the managers on the organization chart. And I'm always interested in that. And I find myself, as I get into the team and organization, I've always got my lens open to where is leadership waking up, and where are the people that are like feeling called to this moment or this part of the journey of that company or whatever it is. And wow, if we get behind that person or if we draw that person out, it doesn't matter whether they're the CEO or whether they're an executive assistant or whether they just arrived and, like from a different company and they're just an intern. If they've got something that's lit up inside of them, there's energy there that can impact and galvanize the energy of lots of people. And so I'm always like, that's like an antenna that is for me is turned on high certainly at certain parts of the time that I work with teams.
You didn't need to understand the question to give the answer I was looking for. So what I heard you say is, so it's situational and circumstantial. Sometimes certain types of circumstances call forth the spirit of leadership that is maybe in all of us and at different individuals at different times, and that it's not a person. It's an energy or something that is a call for leadership to show itself, or the spirit of leadership to emerge in any individual. It could be the janitor could show up as the leader in any moment.
100%.
I've witnessed that happen before. And so it's almost like it's not a quality, it's not something you learn, it's not something you're born with. It's not even particular to the being of the person. It's a spirit of leadership that can be awakened in any individual when circumstances or situations call upon it.
I think so. That's, yeah. I hadn't thought about it before I said it. And that's what, if I'm honest and I really think about even the leaders that I admire the most, that I would say, oh, that person is a beautiful leader or really, like a stunning leader. One of the things I love about them is that, if that person's sitting in a circle of other leaders and other people on their team, there's moments when they are in the middle of that circle, when they're really holding the energy and the intention of the whole group, and what they're sharing is so clear and so needed that you think, wow, would not be a circle without them. But then there's also moments when they step back and they're in the circle and they create space or draw out someone else that they see it's their moment to be in that space. And it doesn't always just happen like individually, but that was just a picture that popped in my mind as we were talking. So my sense is there are certainly people who I guess the willingness to allow that fire to burn brightly and to move with it is stronger in this life, right? So there's certain people who feel that calling more often or move in that way. And then I think when we're with a team often, and a team, oftentimes there's people that will naturally become the leader of that group, the spiritual leader of those school kids. I think we can kind of inhabit that, but I don't think it's a static thing. And I certainly know of the leaders that I love and admire most, the ones that are seen as leaders the longest and most frequently are also constantly evolving as an individual. So they're not like, oh, I'm the manager now, I'm going to stop my growth as a person and just shower these humans with all of my experience. They're always on their own edge, always humble, always listening, leaning in.
The eternal student.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reminded of also, I see this with genius. I think genius and and leadership have something in common, is that genius isn't something that's attributed to a person. And if you take it a word back, it's actually genie. And when there's genius happening in the room, it's happening through a particular individual, but it's the genie, the spirit of genius that's in the room that's moving through any particular person. And so, you know, I have my own kind of way of understanding genius or intelligence or whatever, and I admire certain people's apparent intelligence and genius. But I think that the genie in the room can move through anybody if they're open to it. And like when I saw a janitor in the emergency department calm down a mental health client who was like so obnoxious and so worked up and so aggressive, and like 12 different staff members tried to quiet that guy down. You know, the psychiatrist, the psych nurse, the emergency doctor, the emergency nurse, the social worker, everybody tried to quiet this guy down. And over a period of a couple of hours, and this guy was just, you know, he was on the warpath. And the janitor had been witnessing this whole thing take place, and he's sweeping by with his broom, and he witnessed the whole thing. He's gone up to this crazy guy who looked like he was on crack or something, and he whispered, he didn't whisper because I heard him say it, so loud enough to say, he says, "Hey mate, if you don't like what you're thinking, just change it." And then he just kept sweeping, and this guy just in an instant normalised his crazy behaviour, and he was discharged about half an hour later.
Wow.
And so the genius in the room was the janitor, or the genie was, there was possibility for genie in the space, and it came through the janitor, not the highest paid person in the room. And so I guess what I'm pointing at is this thing about leadership or genius, that we attribute it to individuals, and rather it's just a field of possibility that can awaken in any individual depending on circumstance.
I love it. I totally agree. And I think our current state, if we're, you know, this is where the question started to be born from. If in the last few years we've noticed less and less leaders that we might relate to, or those that we just feel like, wow, you know, questioning how they're there, or, you know, why they're making that call. One of the gifts in it, certainly that I've experienced, is it's pushing more and more for me to become clear about what I see is true and what I need to do to, you know, and what I feel compelled around. And so it's calling on the leader in me. And you can see how we are looking at, you know, it's like we're looking at some idea of the leaders that we think should be fixing things, and the pain is in this kind of like a letdown of expectation. But ultimately, I think it's ultimately bringing us back to the realization that, well, actually, if I want it different, it needs to start here. And I need to feel so committed to having it be different that even if it's only different here in my living room, this is going to be different here. And then even if it's only different here in my yard or my garden or my neighborhood, we're going to make things different here. And so I think there's ultimately a gift here, right? It's pulling on the leader in all of us.
Love it. And so it's such a dynamic conversation for me, because what I just saw for myself is that I was just projecting the lack of leadership out externally and attaching it, you know, through psychological projection. And, you know, I'm fascinated by shadow work, and my shadow is my blind spots and the things I can't see about myself. And we tend to project our shadow out onto others. And that brings it back to, like, I'm seeing the lack of leadership out there, but maybe it's pointing to, well, what about the lack of leadership in me? Is there a lack of leadership in me? And if so, where? And that I would be better off, rather than projecting that out onto Prime Minister or President or whoever, withdraw that projection and say, where can I show up as the type of leadership that I'm looking for external to myself? And what is that? What are these times calling forth in me? And the other thing we have in common too, so we both, I looked at your website and you talk about the hero's journey. I'm a big fan of the archetypal story of the hero's journey.
So
it
awesome.
Underpins everything about humanity. And
so awesome.
And the call to adventure. And we've talked about this call to adventure, and you had it, you know, in sport, and I had it in sport. And And, you know, that's part of stepping up into leadership is, well, there's this call to adventure. Am I going to follow that call or ignore it? And then there becomes the ordeal and the challenge and the innermost cave. And I just think it's a fascinating archetypal story. And it's certainly impacted my life. And I think my nature or temperament is, more often than not, I'll step up and follow that call to adventure rather than ignore it, although I've ignored it at times in my life and just lived a hedonistic lifestyle. So I'd like to go somewhere a little sideways. So where I'm wanting to show leadership at the moment in my life is I'm fascinated by this concept of integrating the shadow, the hidden parts of self. And this is somewhere where I do feel that I have an opportunity and possibility to step into a leadership role with this. And I'm answering that call to adventure of leading a conversation around integrating shadow. There's other people out there also doing that as well. And so the people that are doing that, we're leading that conversation, and I'm part of that leadership group, I guess. And so we all have a shadow. Now, what's impressed me in the time that I've known you is you just strike me as this like sweet, positive, charismatic, light beaming human that I'm gravitated towards. Like, that's how you occur to me. And I'm like, I know there's a shadow in there, right? And so I guess I'm not going to go digging for your shadow. It's not what this is about. But I guess I would like you to bring some balance maybe to my view of you, and that would you be willing to share something possible, something dark, or something, doesn't have to even be dark, something that was hidden about you, that you had to go through that dark night of the soul or into the innermost cave to find some hidden thing that was uncomfortable to face and challenge, and that you went there and overcame that. And or you could speak to, well, yeah, I've got shitloads of stuff about me that's dark and shadowy, and I can name half a dozen habits. Or so go where you want with it. Please share something from your shadow.
Amazing. So first, maybe a really quick story. I was thinking about this morning, and the beautiful work that you do as a spiritual leader in the shadow boxing space. And I did this like a 3-day, so like a self-imposed, it wasn't a retreat, but I went to spend time in this cave for 3 days in New Zealand many years ago. I wasn't sure exactly why, but I felt like I needed to go there while it was dark and spend like the pre-light time and in this cave. And it was a time of like deep reflection for me. And I was going through some challenges of different levels. And it was really interesting because I won't go into a big long story, but the first day I kind of like danced around the edges of the shadows, and I noticed I could stand in the like lit part of the cave, but if I was standing in the lit part of the cave, I couldn't see in the shadows at all, right? And I was like, wow, that's interesting. It's so dark in there. And then the second day, I thought I need to go into the dark place where I can't really see. And what I noticed when I went in there, which was really cool, which I wouldn't have foresaw, was that when I stepped into the shadowy part, I could see both all the shadowy parts and the light part, right? So that was like, oh, this is cool. Okay, well, this is like, suddenly my perspective is, and then on the third day, there was this part of the cave that was really deep, and I was really scared to go in there because he had to crawl under like a really low ceiling, and I didn't know what was back there, but I felt like there was like a room or something, and I don't know why, but I felt like I had to go there. And so on the third day, I got there early, and I crawled through there, and I was so scared. Like I was so scared, and I was like sure that there was dead bodies, and it was so dark there was no way I could kind of acclimate my eyes to it. And so I just got back there, and I was like, I can just remember the adrenaline was just pumping in me. And then I don't know why, but I just started taking deep breaths, and I just let myself sit there and kind of allow myself to be there in what felt really uncomfortable. And over a few minutes, my heart rate slowed down, and it didn't get any lighter, but it was just like all of a sudden I felt like really, really held there. Like, oh, this is beautiful in here. It's so dark. There's nothing distracting my vision here at all. And I felt like a real sense of like a comfort. And it was one of these sort of cosmic moments where that, like right when I was having that thought, that kind of like the sun must have started coming out on the horizon, and like a little like beam kind of like went, like kind of like made it into the cave enough that I could figure out how to get out. And it was sort of like, for me, it was one of my takeaways was, kind of my willingness to go into those spaces where I fear the most to go, and just to breathe there and to be there was also the key to always being able to find my way out, and kind of when I left, I felt this, like, I was in love with that dark space, and I had a totally different view of it. Like, I realized I'd made it this like bad thing, this evil place, this, that the shadow was like, like the, I don't know, like the forbidden realm or something. But I realized it was pristine, and it was like, there was a magic power there that I was probably denying in myself in, trying to stay, always out in the light areas. Right. So that's a, long story to just say that I would say my experience with my own shadow oftentimes has come historically, like, for an example, with big injuries, like historically, I think I didn't go into those places unless life like forced me into them. But then always when I look, I see there's always been gifts there, like deep, magical gifts that ultimately illuminate whatever comes next.
So you can be pushed into your shadow, or you can choose it voluntarily. So the injuries kind of force you to face some dark nights of the soul. But with the cave, you volunteered for that. And you went into the metaphorical, archetypal innermost cave. I mean, I know you were in New Zealand, so there wasn't going to be a bear in there that could tear your head off. Right. I'm not sure if they even have any apex predators. No. Maybe a kiwi might have pecked you to death. But there was still the fear of the darkness, and because you couldn't see, you have to feel around with you, and that would have been scary. But you were aware of the acute sense of fear. And that's a call to adventure, to voluntarily go into the dark places, and you chose to respond to that call. And that's what I ask people to do when they come on and do my shadowboxing course. It's one thing to have life, hurl you into your shadows, whether, it's a divorce or an illness, or your company collapses and all of a sudden you're facing the dark night of your soul. So that it can happen spontaneously. But in my shadow course, I actually invite people to come and look into those dark places, because, as you said, like, what's on the other side can be just bliss. And it's interesting because I've heard different conversations about the abyss, and one is that there's nothing there, and when you stare into the abyss stares back at you, and that can be, not a good idea. But there's another concept that I've heard of, which is that the dark is the feminine, and that black empty space is fertile, rich with possibility and creativity, and it's the feminine, the mother, the matrix from which all, the wellspring from which all things come. And matrix, M-A-T, is mat, or maternal, is mother. And so it's a feminine, the dark space, for those of you who are scared of it, could possibly be the mother nurturing energy that has for you the gifts that you're looking for, but you're not going to encounter them unless you're willing to face your fears and go into the dark. And Jung says, you know, the way to the light is through the dark. So
I love that. I mean, I didn't say it, but as I was describing the kind of feeling of nurture that I felt deep in there, it was like I was in a womb.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, I could sit here for days, you know, and yeah, so you described it.
Yeah. Yeah. In the indigenous culture, there's a cave up here, up on Coonam Range, and men aren't supposed to go there, and it's a cave, and it's women's business only. And the Aboriginal women would go there and do women's business, which I can't speak of because it's women's business. But that cave does represent the womb, you know, the source of all creation as far as humans are concerned. Okay, so I guess we've got a little bit more time.
But just, I'm just, you just like a practical example that just sprang to mind, which might be helpful and it's helping me because I'm thinking about it. I think in a very day-to-day life way, because so much of my work is moving, moving in the direction of possibility. Sometimes, historically, I could have a resistance to going into the things that are blocking, right? Or going into the, like a more, more sensitive conversation with someone, or even if there's a conflict with someone that I'm working with, that a lot of times I've known, you know, that by moving, if we line on where we're moving towards, that will lift us out of a lot of our own blocked spaces. And this I know to be true. And what in terms of my own willingness to go into the places I feel afraid, you know, I think conflict and kind of bringing up a topic or something where I might upset somebody, or I might offend somebody, or they might, you know, whatever, I've noticed is a place where like I will sometimes sit on the edge of. But what I notice is when I'm willing to do that and to trust, like to follow, there's a bit of edge here in the conversation, rather than lean away from it, I'm going to go right in. It ultimately arrives to the similar place as I described with the womb, that it might not be comfortable to go in there, but then it unlocks a whole bunch of energy in the conversation or the dynamic of the person, you know. So if it's a difficult conversation, even that I need to have with my son or something, and I might just say, oh, we don't need to have that conversation for a while, and I'll just I'll just try to move in the direction of the light. But then when we do need to have that conversation, if I just lean into it humbly and crawl back in the cave there, always it's a massive unlock of energy. So that was just kind of springing up for me while you were talking.
Yeah, and what I make of that is that, you know, we face obstacles in life, and one of those obstacles might be fear. And then that if we put our focus on just on the fear, then that might stop us. But if we remember that, the fear's just in the way of something, or I'm actually moving to have simultaneously your attention on the fear, the obstacle, but also your attention on the goal. So to be able to hold two at the same time is, yes, there is this obstacle, this conflict, but I'm also got if I just have my eye on the conflict or on the fear, I might get stopped. But if I can also hold my vision for what's beyond the fear, then I can continue to move beyond the fear, beyond the conflict to the other side.
I love it. And I think it goes back to our conversation around getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, that if my movements or the way I'm connecting with you, even if it's uncomfortable, is in service of something that I or we are committed to, and my compass is on that. It's not on, oh, we need to address this issue because I just want to undress it because it's an issue. But if we're moving in the direction of something together and a block comes up, then diving into it at whatever depth is needed is like ultimately in service of where we're moving together. So I think that helps.
And now that you bring that up, in the moment I saw that what came up for me were the words human potential. Because you said, like, if we're moving together towards something that we share, this shared vision, I thought, well, what that be for you and I? What's the overlap? What do we have in common? And I think we both have a passion and interest from how I'm looking at it in human potential, like what's possible for humanity. And maybe that's the thing that we're both in service to, or something like that.
I love it.
So we probably don't have a lot of time left because I know you're on a busy schedule. But one short thing to finish on, I want to go to your other passion, which is beekeeping.
Sweet.
Sweet, yeah. You've brought a lot of sweetness into my life, including when you showed up this morning. You brought 2 types of honeycomb, one that was uncapped. So the nectar was in there, but they hadn't capped the wax capping on it, so it wasn't yet honey, it was still in the nectar phase. And then some that had been freshly capped, so virgin honey or young honey. And I hadn't experienced either of those before. And when I put that first piece into my mouth of the uncapped nectar, it was just a bouquet of flowers. I don't know how else other to describe it. The myriad of different flavours that were exploding on my tongue was fascinating. So you love bees. You were really generous and moved one of your hives over to our property, and you've introduced me to bees, and I'm already feel like I did with the whales, like there's a teacher-student disciplinary situation going on, and I'm beginning to learn the basics about bees. Would you like to share one thing or something about bees? What's one thread, or maybe one that you've learnt from bees that you incorporate into your coaching or leadership stuff?
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. And it fits, completely in with our conversation. Maybe this whole conversation was orchestrated by the bees as I look at your hexagonal light fixture. Since I started beekeeping, very early on, a bee mentor told me, "Watch out, the bees really get into you," and they have deeply. As we went from one hive to, I think we have 18 at the moment, So their way of being and the way they organize themselves and the way that they purposefully move through their different roles during their 4 to 6 week life, I have learned a ton from. And I'm often bringing, just naturally because I can't help it, sort of reflections and insight from the bees into the work I do with leaders and teams. And now a lot of my clients, when they see me and they haven't seen me for a while, they're interested in how I'm doing, but usually their first or second question is, how are the bees? And did you bring any honey? And that sort of thing. But one of the lessons that certainly I've gained from them, which I've experienced how powerfully this can help a team of people, is to recognize there's something in what I would call a sense of purpose that bees have, both individually and as a collective, which is a lot that we can learn from. And the bees, they live for 4 to 6 weeks, not a long time, except for the queen. She lives 5 to 7 years. So this is a topic for a different conversation. But so in that 4 to 6 weeks, really literally from the moment that they're born, they are working. They have a job, and their job, it moves, it changes and evolves throughout the time. So they start out, their first job is they're cleaning their cell. They're born, and then they clean out the cell, the wax cell that they were born in. And then they go and they start helping other baby bees clean out their cells. And then a lot of them will become nurse bees, feeding and nurturing bees that are being sort of incubated in egg form. And, and then some of them become guards, and some of them become air conditioners, and some of them are, building wax, and some of them, are drawing the comb or filling up gaps with propolis, or, there's all sorts of things. And then normally in the last sort of 2 weeks of their life, they become a forager. And in the last 2 weeks, they're out gathering nectar. And so it's super, it's a wonderful combination of each bee, in a hive, there might be 50 to 80,000 bees, right? So it's a lot of little living beings, but each one has their own unique purpose. Like each one has their own job. They are on purpose, and simultaneously they are completely connected to and in service of the whole. So their number one mission is always potential of humanity, or whatever the term. They're looking, how do I serve the whole here of the bees? Of this bee colony. And so they're always in service of that, and they're so tightly connected that in the bee world, but there's a term they use called hive mind, because the bees, a colony of 50 to 80,000 bees, really moves like one organism, and you really see this when they swarm. There's thousands of them, but they're all connected to the same impulse or intention. And I think there's something really beautiful about that parallel of being both very individual. Each one is playing their unique part, and each one is simultaneously totally part of the whole. And that balance, I feel like, is something that's really needed, not only inside of businesses or organizations, but like in the planet at the moment, right? So we talk about unity, and we talk about wanting to, be more connected as a human race. But part of that is also each of us being totally connected with our part, and knowing that our part might evolve day to day, but that there's this like simultaneous requirement of me showing up and doing my part, and doing it in concert with the greater whole. So that's a piece around purpose, which has really like rung strong in me a lot, and in a lot of the work I do.
I knew my mind would be blown today. And I spoke about the genie, the spirit of genie in the room, and I want to just wrap up with that. I want to acknowledge the genie in the room that expressed itself through this humble beekeeper, Chipp Richards. Thanks so much, Chipp, for coming on the show. I could talk for another 2 hours, but I know you've got commitments, and I probably do too. So hopefully this won't be our last conversation. I'm sure it won't be. Deep gratitude for showing up today and sharing some of the lessons you've learnt from the whales, the bees, and from the innermost cave.
Thanks, Pete. It has been a total honor and a total delight. And yeah, let's call this part one.
Okay, great.
Awesome.